polka, that's for me, living life so merrily. It's so easy, can't you see? Polka, polka, that's for me. Polka, polka, everyone come along, it's lots of fun.
Miguel Iterati here with the Talk and Shoot podcast. We are back. I am back with Mike Davis, my sidekick here. Mike?
Hey, what's up, Miguel? Always a pleasure.
Good to hear from you, buddy. How's it going?
Real good, man. Just enjoying the summer. We don't really get much of it here in Chicago, but, at the end of the day, you got to take what you can get.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a lot of fun there. Well, we are going to talk about the state of MMA. This is our periodical look at how MMA is doing. The recent UFC shows obviously saw Ronda Rousey run over Beth Correa this last weekend. Glover Teixeira beat Ovin St. Pro in their main event fight. Some controversy there. We'll touch on some of the judging controversy that came up on that show. We'll look at the future calendar. Obviously, the UFC is going to take this weekend coming up off, but they will be back with UFC Fight Night 74 on August 23rd. That's headlined by Max Holloway and Charles Oliveira, and that's a good little card as well. Other subjects we want to talk about, I want to just touch on Bellator, touch on the state of the World Series of Fighting and the debacle that they recently had on their show. So Mike, where do you want to hit this? What do you want to do? Let's go over this this UFC from last weekend. What did you think of? Go ahead.
You know what? I thought it was a really good card, and I thought the OSP Teixeira fight was really fun to watch. As a fan. I know there was a couple judging, or I should say one judging issue with the Deliush and Johnson fight.
Yeah.
And, I can tell you, I consider myself an expert at the sport, and based on who was judging, I certainly could have told you immediately that if there were to be a problem in that avenue, it certainly would be that fight.
Interesting. Now, let's go over some of the details. You got a couple of lightweights there. Both of them were on 4-fight winning streaks. You got Michael Johnson. Johnson,
who's a stud, by the way.
Yeah, he's been. I think he's had the higher level of competition in the UFC, in my opinion. Going back, he's beaten Tony Ferguson. He's the only guy to do that. A couple other guys on his resume that are high level guys. But Johnson
lit him up in that first round. Lit him up ugly. And the second round was closer, but Johnson clearly won the second round, and he faded. Like he exhibited some cardio issues, and obviously lost the third round. But the first two rounds were clearly Johnson.
Now, here's the thing with Johnson. First, to put it just in perspective. He won last February, beating Edson Barbosa in 2015. But prior to that, he'd been off for roughly a year. Now, anybody who's in the top 5 or 8 in a weight class like Michael Johnson was getting to be, really is going to suffer from a year layoff. So he came back with a win, and this was going to be a second win now with just a few months. Between them, about 5 months, this was a chance for Johnson to start picking up some momentum. And as you pointed out, he's a pretty high level guy. He's we talked a little bit about his resume being good and being good with the UFC and stuff. And I think he was, this win and another win away maybe from a title shot. Now Dariush, I'm a fan of. Here's my problem with it. Is Dariush I'm a fan of. I like his mindset. I know he comes from the reality show. I know he's got an ugly loss to Ramsey Nijem, who I don't think that much of. But since then, he also...
Really?
I'm not a big fan of Ramsey Nijem. No, when you... wear some friggin' shorts to the weigh-ins, you got him on a 4-fight winning streak. But again, I think that you could clearly see... he beat Jim Miller, which was a good win. But you can clearly see he doesn't
dominated Jim Miller.
From top to bottom, he doesn't have really the depth of opposition that Johnson has. So I looked at this as a very interesting fight. It was a step-up fight for Dariush. I think Dariush looked like a fighter. I think he took a lot of... I think he lost the fight, but I think he fought through it the whole time, and maybe that confuses judges that aren't that
So I'm going to
educated.
tell you another thing that confuses judges. These Reebok fight kits, it's either predominantly black, white stripe, or predominantly white, black stripe. Like, you throw two bald guys in there with similar builds, that would be a nightmare to figure out. I've seen this before. Like, I've seen guys that, back in the day that look similar that, and obviously not this case. I mean, you've got two different ethnicities in there, but those fight shorts, man, they are a nightmare. They need to figure this out now. Nike spent a lot of money for this. Some say, I mean, as you had stated, they got a deal on it, but their approach to this just tells me that as big of a business as Reebok might be, they were not prepared for the UFC.
No,
Whether it was name spelling wrong or things of that nature. I mean, it's common sense.
Well, face it. I mean, in the scope of things, this is a $70 million deal for Reebok. They must have their B team on it, and I mean that's the bottom line. Because I'm gonna look. I don't know details about the NBA deals with sneaker companies and stuff, but I just recently read that James Harden, the Houston Rockets shooting guard, he's looking at signing a $200 million deal just himself.
Just himself.
So, I mean, Reebok's worried about that. And I don't know if that's what Reebok, that's what I mean where I don't know details. But it is with a shoe company, So that's the kind of money that Reebok really throws around. For an individual athlete here, they were like, hey, man, look, we got a bargain here. 600 plus athletes for $70 million. Let's go for it. So, like I said, that was what they cared about. Did they put the love and detail into it? No, I don't think they know the sport. I think the UFC in this particular case may have done, a little bit of a gloss over job on this and not get into the details of some of those things. I think you're right. I think there is a risk. And here's the other part is, I've been around a lot of these fights. I've been around a lot of these judges, especially when a judge gets assigned by a commission and they really don't know MMA. I've literally been in a situation where the judge is asking which guy is which. Who's Johnson? Who's Dariush? I don't know if it happens quite at the UFC level, but that's a co-main event. But again, you're talking about Michael Johnson. To the fan, he's a lightweight who's getting ready to make an impact, but it's a generic name. He hasn't fought he's fought once in the last year and a half. What judge is really going to know him? And Dariush is still coming up. Dariush is not a big name unless you're a fan and you watch the reality TV.
He's kind of a legend amongst the local California scene coming up. They said the kid was just a beast. Like he really had a good reputation for himself. On the West Coast. So, his strength is jiu-jitsu.
No. I enjoy him. I like the way he fights. I like his mindset. I think
He didn't win that fight, though.
No, he did not. And that's the shame of it, is that we've touched on this before, is who are these MMA judges? Why are these people? What qualifies someone to judge this? Because what I don't see, take it back a little bit, and I know sometimes people do not like to mix sports, but if you really look back at the history of boxing, now boxing comes up through the dark ages in the 18-somethings, where it changes over from being like, outlaw sport to being covered in newspapers as a sport and things like that, and people start coming up. And then there are issues. There are a couple of refs that just transcend time and they come through time, and judges and things that you hear about and have a reputation. But in the old days, it was who's in charge, or the promoters used to be refereeing and judging and stuff, and that leads to another set of mess. Then a commission comes in and issues the sport. But once the sport was at around this time where it's already legitimate, but it doesn't have a huge history, similar to where MMA is now. Most of the referees and judges were either people from the boxing world that had been around boxing the whole time, or actually former boxers. You have stories such as, for example, the legendary all-time great lightweight world champion Benny Leonard, considered by many the best lightweight of all time. He died in the ring, refereeing many years after his career was over. And I'm not saying, Randy Couture should die in the ring, refereeing and stuff. But I don't see any attempt to bring back judges. The only, who have experience at this sport, and I think that's a grave, grave mistake. The only real example I can think of off the top of my head operating in the United States is Renzo Gracie's student and former UFC middleweight Ricardo Almeida. And I believe Almeida at one point has served as a judge for UFC fights in New Jersey, and he's a member of the New Jersey State Athletic Control Board and the licensed judge there. But that's not happening enough in MMA. How in the world does Adelaide Byrd get any clearance to judge MMA? I don't understand how that could possibly happen. Adelaide Byrd is one of the worst reputed boxing judges that exists out there, in any way, shape, or form. It's a joke. If you present that boxing resume like for a job as an MMA judge, you should be rejected and laughed out of the country. If you got the job,
I can further this conversation and kind of tie it into why it's important in this fight in general. Douglas Crosby. Douglas Crosby has got a lot of fans in MMA. Charles Sonnen being one of them. I've had the pleasure of meeting Douglas in Ohio one time. Shook his hand, seemed like a really good guy. He does not do himself any favors when he does Sonnen's podcast. He doesn't do himself any favors when he goes online trying to defend, whatever horrific decision that, he came up with. And I can tell you another thing. Do you think it is proper for a judge, an MMA judge, that has been served with orders of protection against him from gym owners based on some erratic behavior displayed by that person? I think that ought to disqualify you across the board from judging, period.
Yeah, he
has that Ray Longo issued an order of protection against him because of his erratic behavior and having people drop off letters, insulting letters to him, as well as, when he judged the Iaquinta versus Jorge Masvidal fight, although I think Iaquinta took the split decision, but I think most media observers and fans thought Masvidal had deserved it, and Crosby in that instance did give it to Masvidal, but he's just involved in way too much controversy for a sport, as you and I are talking about, is still kind of developing.
See, I don't know. Here's a couple of theories if we want to talk a little bit about judging. It's an interesting thing because in Japan, in boxing, the judges are anonymous. If you look at most of the results, now not for like world title fights or for fights involving foreigners and stuff, because they follow a protocol. But if you look at the average boxing show at Korakuen Hall, on a Wednesday with 8 fights and 6 and 8 rounders, they don't even tell you who the judges are. And that's not particularly a bad thing because the judge, like a Crosby or like an Adelaide Byrd, tend to become a little bit of a celebrity, and they tend to become a little bit of the story, and their opinion tends to count. Now there's the opposite end of the spectrum because it's how people handle that. And in Japan, they don't play any of that. You don't even know who the people are. They're just intrinsically, by virtue of being part of the commission, they are considered to be trustworthy and people that are going to judge a boxing match on good faith. Now, to make sure that happens, we publicize the names in the States just because of a cultural thing. Now, that's where people maybe start to become a little bit of a celebrity and stuff, and this is what I don't agree with. Douglas Crosby, it seems, I don't know him, but he seems to pursue some of these, opportunities to be in the media and things like that, and that's okay. It's not illegal. He's allowed to do that. But I don't think that the media or anybody, I would like to, look, judging is a very difficult job. Besides being the ref, it may be the most difficult job around the fight because, especially in MMA, you're literally determining a guy whether he's going to get, half pay or double pay, with the bonus for the win. You're really actually affecting a guy's pocket, so you better know what you're doing. more than anything, you better be able to explain your situation and your position. You know, if a judge is in disagreement with the majority of the people, but he can back his position, but he can back his position, then there really is nothing that you can do in terms of the judge. You know, because if they're able to talk their way through it in a convincing fashion and be educated about it. You could disagree with them, but at the same time, they are able to back their position. That's really all I think you can ask of a judge. But there is none of this process. It's like, you know, hey, Adelaide Bird, wake up. What are you thinking? What are you seeing in some of these fights? I don't see that coming out like in the media or, you know, in boxing websites or anything like that, and especially in MMA websites. In a questionable situation like this, put the judge to the test, and that is, just have them answer questions. What did you see? What happened in the third round? How could you give the second round to Dariush? What are you looking at? Those types of things. Let them see. You know, I don't know. You know, I seem to think Johnson blew a lot of energy needlessly. He came out tired in the third round, which seemed to confirm that. And he was putting on a lot of stuff and not doing a lot of damage. So I didn't give him as much credit as I thought. Okay, maybe, you know, I'm just making things up. But if they sound credible and they can back their positions up, over time, you can make a credible decision, you know, as to whether you like them as a judge or not. I mean, you have situations in boxing where people will not fight unless they have a certain person not judging a fight, a certain referee not refereeing a fight. It hasn't quite come to that in MMA yet, but that's what we're heading for, is somebody who's going to say, you know, I don't want Ian Levine being my ref. I don't want...
Mazzagatti.
Yeah, you know, or I don't want this other, you know, Douglas Crosby judging my fights. You know, my style is this, and he tends to go against it. So, yeah, judging in MMA remains one of the murkiest of messy subjects because there is nobody there. There's no attempt at bringing in experts. There are experts to the fight, you know? I mean, not for nothing, but if I was an MMA fighter and Ricardo Almeida, we'll name Dave Strasser because he's a friend of ours, and Chael Sonnen.
Friend of yours.
Were the
friend of
yours. You know, he's a friend of the podcast.
Okay.
But, you know, if my judges were Strasser, Sonnen, and Almeida, I can handle that. Or, at the very least, I know that if I disagree with one of them, I could go and have a conversation with them on some type of equal footing. You know, when you're talking, if you're going to go talk to Adelaide Bird now, you got a blue-haired old lady, you know, how in the world are you going to connect? At least Strasser's been in the cage 30 times. At least Sonnen, we've all seen, and Almeida is a jiu-jitsu black belt, you know, with a lot of MMA fights himself. So it just doesn't make sense what the criteria is for MMA judging, and nobody seems to really care about it.
Yeah, to me that's well, I mean it's not just MMA, it's boxing as well. Clearly, you know, you've got Adelaide Bird reffing it or judging in Vegas. You know, I mean that's a commission that kind of sets the tone for everybody else, and you know they're given the green light and the nod to this person. I just look at it this way: when you're the commissioner, you know your reputation is like credit, and what you do for every single event is going to follow you. And you know, once you take a hit, it takes years to get it off of your record. And anyone that even hires Adley Bird or even Douglas Crosby at this point, Douglas Crosby, nice guy. I enjoyed hanging out with him, but at the end of the day, his erratic behavior in interviews, his issues with judging, like in the Penn Edgar fight, where Penn clearly won the first round, he gave all 5 rounds to Frankie Edgar, but BJ Penn clearly won the first round in that fight, and it's just, you know, you're opening yourself up. Like you can sit here and say Douglas Crosby, Adelaide Bird. At the end of the day, you've got to blame the person that put them in that position. And,
which in this case is the commissions. The commissions do that, and the UFC is likely able to have some influence. And I'm not saying bad influence, because I think Dana really cares about this stuff, and he'd rather have it judged well and stuff as well. But their influence is very limited. So it's like you do wind up with having to deal with, why would Adelaide Bird even be allowed at a UFC event? She wouldn't even know it was happening if she didn't have an invite and was going to clear a paycheck for working it. But anyway, let's move on from a little bit. We digressed into judging from the UFC's. We wanted to look at the Dariush Johnson situation because it is one of the hot button topics that's out there, and obviously you roll into some more of the problems around the judging.
I don't think Johnson's made for a 5-round fight. I'll tell you that. I mean, he was on fire, and there was a lot of wasted movement. But that guy was on fire, and I couldn't believe how he took it to him. How he took it to Dariush. I was really surprised at that. I thought that was just going to be a war, and it was actually pretty one-sided.
Yeah, I think Dariush showed some guts taking punishment. I think that that actually has its place in how you judge a fighter. So. He was there for the whole time, but I do think that the judging... Let's go over UFC Fight Night 73 really fast, some of the other important touch points. Glover Teixeira took out Ovin St. Pro. Teixeira, I mean, you got to look back and remember a couple of years ago, he was the most feared man in the division. People were turning down fights with this guy, and he was on a fast track to get to a title shot. Not even really a fast track. There was no denying him because he was just beating everybody.
He had what was it, visa issues? Did he get a record or something like that? What was the
that? I'm not sure of. If he's been coming up here for a while now. What he ran into was a John Jones issue. Is that John Jones, pummeled him, and then just goes to show Phil Davis hugged him to death, and it.
Well, he's 36 now. In
Teixeira?
Teixeira.
And he has a rough style to maintain as you get older because, he
only got so many rounds in you.
He will take... I'm not saying he's moving back to the top, but I'm saying that he did his job here as a doorman because, like I said, he was one of the top guys in the division. 2 losses. He was almost a forgotten man. St. Pro did need a name like Teixeira on his resume. He'd been beating the guys he should beat. He had some, some success in the UFC with a winning record, but Teixeira just proved himself a notch above. Another interesting fight on the card that I found, there was some overall entertaining little fights and things. I thought the flyweights in Ray Borg and Dustin Ortiz looked good, but the really notable win I think was Amanda Nunes in the bantamweight division. Not so much that Amanda's ready for a title shot, though I've seen some people start calling for it. It's not that, but I think what it does is it completely wipes out McMahon. Sarah McMahon, the opponent there, Olympic medalist in wrestling, also now in her mid-30s, but expected to be, at the very least, athletically and resume-wise, she could be in the conversation with Rousey. Rousey already wiped her out once. They were going to need to rehab her and bring her back with a few wins, and she needed to kind of be spectacular in order to make some noise. Instead, she dragged her way to a split decision win, and then she, lost to Miesha Tate, which really is there's no shame in that. But she needed to beat Nunes. She was favored, and Nunes was there for her to start another winning streak, and she got beat up and taken out of the fight. Out in 3 minutes, and I think that's the end of Sarah McMahon.
She got wrecked. Yeah, she's getting cut. When you throw around the words Olympic wrestler, you just think just utter dominance. They're going to get a takedown whenever it is they want, any angle against anybody. And for Sarah McMahon, unfortunately, it just doesn't have seemed to like her chin. It just hasn't seemed to transition to mixed martial arts.
I agree with you. I'll go even further. Now Rousey has proven herself to be, an elite athlete and stuff. But I believe that holds. I believe that holds true for almost any of the combat sports when you move over to the women's side. Olympic wrestling doesn't mean as much on the women's side as Olympic wrestling on the men's side, where you face.
I didn't want to say that.
And I'm not putting the women down because I'm very proud that they're competing for themselves, and that they're an Olympic event means that they've received a certain level of recognition. But that goes through in boxing as well. Holly Holm was a world champion boxer, and she's an exceptional athlete and stuff. But again, just on the men's side, I think that the men in boxing are at such an elite level, and the sport is so far beyond where the women's levels are, that you won't even see a boxing world champion in the men's side transition over to MMA, because it's just, too defined and too specialized. Home can still pull it off, kind of thing, because they're not that advanced. And I think the same probably goes for judo, and it's taken much more seriously, in the men's divisions in many countries out there. So I'm not knocking it, but sometimes, you got to take Sarah McMahon's resume a little bit with a grain of salt. She looks like a muscle-heavy athlete. She doesn't look like an explosive athlete. Maybe that's changed now that she's in her mid-30s, but that's not good in MMA when you're slow.
She just hasn't transitioned. Not the sport for her, unfortunately. I think she just should resign to coaching.
Yeah, she looks like in the early days, she looks like,
UFC 1, 2, 3.
Or Brian Keck, or, Andy Freed, or many of the wrestlers that came in over with a lot of hype. Royce Alger, and, did one or two MMA fights, got their clocks cleaned, and went home,
I agree. I agree. I think overall it was a really good event. I was surprised to see OSP as the favorite in a Teixeira fight. Like, if you look at their styles, OSP really kind of comes from wide angles, and Teixeira really likes to stay in the pocket and go inside and, commits to the actual exchange. And generally speaking, those types of matchups always favor the guy that stays in the pocket, providing that he has a chin. And, Teixeira, although he can't take a punch like he used to, he's been wobbled a few times in his last few fights.
He fights hurt.
Yeah, he fights, but...
I agree. I just don't think a lot of people analyze that. I thought this was actually... I hit a 5-fight parlay on this fight. It was... I thought it was relatively easy pickings in this one. I thought Brunson, was going to out-athlete Alvey, and he did.
Alvey looked like he just quit.
I thought Uriah Hall would bounce back with a good win, and he did. He was facing a newcomer who was a late replacement. So overall, it was a good card. Let's move on to the calendar. I'm just going to really quick gloss over. You've got August 23rd, UFC Fight Night 74. This is their next show. It's up in Saskatchewan, Canada. As I stated, the main event is at featherweight. You got Charles Oliveira, Max Holloway. Both guys, very talented. That's a very nice high-level fight there. The rest of the card has some interesting fights as well. The co-main event is Rick Story against Eric Silva. You've got Josh Burton fighting Patrick Cote there. Got a couple of women's fights as Marina Moros returns as facing Valerie Letourneau. And you goes on and on and on there. It's a 12-fight card. And we'll see how that one plays itself out this weekend. Also popping up on the calendar here. Now, there was a lot of talk about UFC 193 possibly being in Dallas' is Cowboy Stadium. I think it's AT&T Park now or something like that. But basically, Cowboy Stadium, a 60,000-seat arena on United States soil. And they were considering tossing Aldo McGregor on there with a potential matchup of Rousey and
on the undercard,
and Cyborg, I guess, for the co-main event. Now that would have been huge. The UFC's moved a little bit away from that sort of a game plan or that.
They actually signed a contract with the MGM Grand. I think I read that this morning.
Yep, it's December 12th. It will be Jose Aldo versus Conor McGregor at the MGM Grand. I just believe the UFC at the end of the day monetizes best when they're in Vegas. That's where they're at home.
They get paid to be in Vegas.
I don't know if the ability to do Dallas Stadium or there was also talk. It's died down, and obviously it's not going to happen. But there was talk like every year that they wanted to change the laws in New York and play the Garden and stuff. And I think that stuff has value over playing the MGM Grand. That's just my opinion. The trip to Vegas too. I just think that the UFC is bigger than Vegas, or that the sport and fighting should be bigger than Vegas.
But when you have
all
a venue,
their big cards there, I think they should diversify. When you have a venue
that pays you to be there, it's hard to go somewhere else.
No, I understand, and that's why I said they monetize best there. And at the end of the day, you can't knock that. That's going to be the biggest fight of the year, especially if they somehow manage to ink Rousey and Cyborg as the co-main event there. Anyway, what else is in the news, Mike? What do you got? What do you got that you want to talk about?
Well, we got Paul Harris with World Series of Fighting.
Okay. Yeah, let's talk about that because.
Go ahead.
Let me just go over here basically the details of it. You got the World Series of Fighting, and you got one of their champions, Rousimar Polaris, who has really established himself as a pariah in the sport, I think. So let's go over the details. Polaris was a UFC fighter. I would call him a mid-level UFC fighter at the time. When he left the UFC, he had just beaten Mike Pierce in 30 seconds with a heel hook that he held on for too long. The reputation of him holding on to to finishing holds for too long haunted him, and the UFC just cut ties with him. Prior to that, he had lost 2 fights in a row, so it's not like I can't call him a top-tier UFC guy. Since then, he went to the World Series of Fighting, and he was suspended, and he made all the apologies. And he beat Steve Carl and he beat John Fitch relatively fast, again with submissions. Just got to about the borderline of holding those. No real, news blurbs came up or really attacks and stuff. But despite all the rhetoric that he would never do it again and stuff like that, he was sort of flirting with it with both Carl and Fitch. And now with Shields was a big favorite, I think, going into the fight because, after all, Shields is, a long-time big name on the MMA scene. Not known for his excitement in his fights, but is a very, very high-skilled competitor. And let's just say, first of all, Polaris is a moron because the move and the finish of Shields, the transition in that Kimura, to do that to Jake Shields means that you've improved. And it was not a knee bar, like he's known as a knee bar monster or a leg lock champion or whatever. And it was a Kimura late in the round against an expert black belt. And
so he landed it.
And he really has shown progress. Up until that point, if he had released the hold, he was about to be getting a lot of props because submitting Jake Shields is no joke.
I agree.
And the moron holds the maneuver well beyond tapping, later makes excuses like he forgot. It's like he forgot all the stuff that happened to him 3 years ago, and now his excuse is like, well, I didn't feel him tap. It's like, you know what? I mean, he is smacking you on the ass. The referee is in there. You know what I mean? It's like, how can this guy... Well, this guy's got a psychological problem in terms of, adrenaline management, machismo. It's a convergence of things that happen in what I basically think is a pea little brain, and he's a dumb motherfucker that can't let go of of a submission.
A submission. And, well, if I may also add on to this, first and foremost, Shields was blind going into the third round. All the eye gouging from Paul Harris, Shields couldn't see. His corner wanted to stop the fight. They continued to talk to Mazzagatti throughout the entire fight about it. Mazzagati's, I got you. Never having done anything. So he went into that third round seeing shadows, which is pretty scary. Like the eye gouges that I watched him receive far outweighed any holding of any submission. Now, secondly, Mazzagatti is an awful referee.
Yep, it touches on an earlier subject, yep.
Every single time he walks in there. If you look at the positioning of Mazzagatti and where he was at in comparison to where, the fight was and where the submission was taking place, he was way out of position. Now, for somebody on the local scene, I get that. You're still kind of feeling your way. This guy is refereeing main events. Like, it's a black eye for the commission anytime anybody brings Steve Mazzagatti in, and that's a fact.
No, it's the commission giving themselves a black eye for hiring and bringing in the guy and insisting on it, because it's not like people haven't complained about him. Dana's been very, Dana
all you
White.
gotta do is do a Google search.
You know,
all you gotta do is do a Google search.
Now this is the arrogance and part of the symptomatic breaking of the commission process that exists here. If Mazzagatti is refereeing a show, despite all the history and all the complaints from promoters about his work, then this is simply that Mazzagatti, when his license comes up and needs to be renewed, he fills out the form, hands in his $75 or whatever the referee licensing fee is, and somebody at the commission takes the money and stamps the license, and he's on the list, and that's them having absolutely no process other than take money in terms of who will judge and who will referee. It's crazy. It's just a crazy thing. And, I like Shields. Shields is a nice kid. He's not a kid anymore, but I've known him for a long time. At one point, he was managed by his father, and he was always a very nice story and a very nice professional camp to deal with. I think that the WSOF probably wanted him to beat Polaris anyway because, he's probably a more marketable champion. Now, the WSOF is in real shambles because they've stripped Polaris, and, probably Polaris will not be back there. Polaris will now probably, I give him 5 years before he winds up in jail. He's that type of moron.
You give him that long?
So we'll see. I mean, he doesn't have any outlet. The only thing he can do is go back to Brazil and fight on Brazilian shows. And, he'll find some there because there just seem to be so many. But even in Brazil, there's a lot of commissions being built and powers that be here and there. And many of them will, get the word, hey, don't use this guy. They already probably got it from the UFC, but it couldn't be clearer that you're putting a fighter in danger and that you're dealing with a guy who's not psychologically fit.
Let's not forget, this goes back to Babalu. And the UFC made an example of him when he held on to his submissions too long.
And I think Babalu and Polaris are actually different cases. I think Babalu did do some stupid stuff, but I don't think he had the pervasive history of doing it, especially throughout all his fights. While this guy's done it, been suspended, gotten a reputation for it, and here he did it again. So it's just unfortunate, and it's a black eye on the sport. And unfortunately, too, the thing is that it looked like Polaris is, with the stocky nature and the muscular build and stuff that he has, he can actually be a very dangerous 170-pounder if he had been able to get his game to the next level. Now, staying in this fight with Shields, the eye gouging and stuff is very ugly, but, I think Polaris, in terms of submissions and stuff, really is at the next level because, submitting Fitch...
That's impressive.
And Shields, back-to-back.
That's impressive. It tells you his MMA game has stepped up. My big issue with him is, Miguel, as you and I are firm believers, when you screw up, you got to take your weight. We've both been in positions where you just go, yeah, I messed up, I apologize. That is the best direction when faced with adversity caused by yourself. When you look at Paul Harris's press release in regards to all of the situations and circumstances surrounding his actions, all it does is just it paints himself as a victim. Poor me, poor me, poor me. Bro, you got a huge history. You have failed for elevated testosterone levels in the past, failed tests for that. This guy is just a cheat.
Yeah, no.
In every sense of the way.
At this point, for him to say, poor me, it's like, yeah, poor you for just being a dumb moron. You know what I mean? For not getting it. And here's the thing is only an athlete, only an MMA, only a boxer knows what it really feels like to knock someone out. Only an MMA guy knows what it feels like in in the heat of combat, to have a guy's arm in your hand and be able to break it, or have a guy's knee and be able to break it. And the sport really counts on people's ability to manage that. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
because
I agree.
it is a rush, it is a control, it is an ego boost, it does all of those things, and a prerequisite for a professional fighter is that they overcome the need to, feed off of that particular energy. You know what I mean? You have to be able to back off when the submission is there, and this guy has just not been able to cross that line, and that to me leaves him outside of being a professional athlete, and leaves him basically as a dangerous, type of hitman kind of thing. I don't know what to describe him as, but when he enters the ring and he doesn't let go of submission, he's crossed out of being an athlete and participating in athletics into something more. He's feeding his ego or something. I know it's a weird assessment, but the number of times it's happened, it hints at some type of psychological issue,
I cannot agree more.
So,
I cannot agree more. And like you said, this guy, people like him, and I'm knocking on wood hoping this doesn't happen, usually it doesn't end pretty.
Like I said, I give him 5 years before he winds up in jail.
You just hope the damage is limited to themselves. You really hope the damage is limited to themselves and doesn't affect too many outside people.
He's a black belt. He's dedicated his life to this. He's come along in terms of other submissions too and stuff, but he's been doing this. This is his job. It's not like he's going to say, well, man, I'm glad I invested in, a car wash and a restaurant back home. I'm just going to go run my little businesses and move on. What's this guy going to do for a living? You know what I mean? If he's got something terrific, move on, because the MMA sport world no longer needs you. But I think it's a worrisome situation, because I think, a guy with that limited sense of thinking and ability, I think his eggs are all in this one MMA basket. So we'll see what becomes of Rousimar Polaris. Want to talk about Rousey a little bit? Let's see here. Well,
she was like, if you watched the last UFC, she was on about 6 different commercials for different brands. I also know that the buy rate for this, I think, broke UFC records. So UFC's got 2 events in a row that each broke records, which is, the UFC is hot right now.
Yeah, look, I was talking with a couple of people about, it's interesting, a few years back you had St. Pierre, Anderson Silva, Chael Sonnen, John Jones, if you go back a little bit, Brock Lesnar. Those were the big MMA pay-per-view draws of the last few years. And in 2015, that's firmly come down to 2 people. It's just 2. And it's McGregor and Rousey. And that's it. That's all they really have. No, they can't count on anyone else to really put, a major pay-per-view on. Weidman's not there. Weidman's a nice fight. Rockhold is a nice fight, rather, and Weidman's a nice fighter. But they haven't put the investment into him. He's also been hurt and hasn't really fought consistently. In Werdum, they've got a heavyweight that, speaks poor English. He'll be decent for them in other markets. But, they've had Junior Dos Santos as a champion before, and they're already huge in Brazil. So, they don't need much help there. Werdum, they don't have a pay-per-view draw. Weidman, they don't. Cormier... Cormier will always be a B-class champion because of the John Jones situation. And, from there it whittles down. Lawler seems to, Lawler's the guy they themselves disrespected by putting him in as, the bottom line is Robbie Lawler was an afterthought to the Conor McGregor Jose Aldo fight. And the truth of the matter is when Jose Aldo pulled out of the fight and Chad Mendes was moved in and the fight was made into an interim fight, the bottom line is that it is an absolute no-brainer that Robbie Lawler and Rory McDonald should have been moved to be the main event. But that was not the case. And, McGregor was the main event the whole way. So Lawler is a guy that, he's mild-mannered. I don't know that he's going to be a big media, explosion at some point, but they marketed him poorly. And that goes all the way down at lightweight. They've got an injured Brazilian champion, and then Aldo, Dillashaw, and Johnson, and we know they don't love any of the lower weight classes. So
Demetrius is you're never going to be able to market that guy, unfortunately.
So what you got is basically got Rousey and McGregor as the two biggest draws. They may combine them still at the end of the year if something happens. They'll just put the Rousey fight in Vegas. Here's the thing is I'm going to repeat it because I've said it a couple times, but I'll repeat it. The bottom line is what the UFC needs to do is they need to just completely backtrack and forget about egos and get rid of all this nonsense that they're doing. They can't sign a title fight with Cyborg without her fighting at least once at 135 in my book. And the bottom line is can she make 135? She seems to have backtracked from I can't make it to I'm gonna make it to do this fight. But I don't know if that's a great situation. So how do you spin it and make the fight happen? I think that the UFC should inaugurate their 145-pound weight class immediately. They should also activate the 125-pound class so that way they get a dual pop for it. They could get anybody to fight on the undercard for that belt. You know what I mean? It'll be Rousey moving up in weight to capture her second weight class world title and facing Cyborg at 145 for the world title. I think that's the right way to do it. I think if you do a catch weight of 140, because Cyborg absolutely can't make it, it defeats the point of actually making this something bigger than it is. It adds an asterisk to it. Oh, it was a catch weight. No. Rousey moved up to fight for the 145-pound title because she is wiped clean the 135-pound division. Why not do that?
I will one-up you. I will one-up you. I don't think somebody should have a title fight in an organization unless they've actually fought for the organization before. And I know, she fought for Leach.
I disagree with that. I in general, I think you're right.
If you're the UFC and you're concerned about your brand because they push their brand more than they do their fighters, I can't imagine going from Invicta to a UFC title fight, even though that's the obvious fight.
All right, look. Here's the deal: is especially let's just stick with UFC and stuff. But I disagree with that because there's situations that arise, especially like this with Rousey. There's no one on the Holly Holm. Please, Holly Holm has looked awful in her UFC debut. In terms of is she a girl who's okay and has talent and has been building up, but ready for Rousey? Holly Holm is 10 fights away. You know what I mean? That's just not happening. So they have absolutely no one on the roster who they can even justify a fight for that isn't going to end the way they've been ending. It's just they have no one. So it's a situation where there is someone out there that has done the work. Now, the reason I don't think it's a knock on the UFC is the UFC can bring him into a title fight. Now, let's say Cyborg wins. What does that do? Ooh. It doesn't do anything to the UFC because the UFC has a contract with Cyborg now, and Cyborg is 100% owned by them. So it all becomes UFC. The best fighters, they leave with, just like Rousey doesn't have competition, Cyborg has got, she might as well be fighting Uriah Faber next. There's no men, there's no women at 145 for her to fight either. So she's cleaned everyone out. So I think you can justify it. I think there are certain situations, like, for example, Henry Cejudo, Olympic gold medalist. He comes into the UFC. No, I would not give him a instant title shot with Demetrius Johnson. There is a weight class there. There is a competition there. And, yes, let him prove himself. But someone like Cyborg, who does have a pedigree from outside that everybody does know, and in a weight class that you're inaugurating, so that there isn't a lot of competition there yet, I think you can justify it. I think you can justify it and actually be criticized less than they were for just giving Rousey the belt. Remember, Rousey was just given the belt. It was like, hey, guess what? You never fought in the UFC, and you are a UFC champion. That's how it went down for Rousey the first time. So this is actually much more pure than what they actually did the first time around with Rousey to get her a belt.
Well, this is something you see more in boxing, and I would have never guessed it would happen in the UFC. When somebody comes from another organization for an immediate title shot, they even did it with Lesnar. They made him Lesnar fight, prior to fighting for the title. So,
but let me ask you a question. What do you do? Do you do Cyborg Miesha Tate then? Like who greets Cyborg in the door for her justification fight?
I'd go with Betcha Correa.
You're just trying to say. I understand, and it's your theory.
And
you're just trying to satisfy getting her a fight because is that fight interesting? No.
Making sure she can make weight. You got to make sure she can make weight.
I agree, but that's why I'm doing the fight at 145. That's why I'm doing the fight at 145 to fill a vacant title.
Okay, if I'm, that's smart. If I'm Rousey,
if Rousey should not accept a catch weight, no way. But at 145, Rousey can have the time. She can move up. I don't think Rousey's scared to fight a bit, she's going to be bigger at 145. I think Rousey is talking the company line of, no, she comes to 135 because I'm the champion, blah, blah, blah. And that's what Rousey's doing. But I don't think Rousey's afraid. I think Rousey, you tell her, look, Ronda, you're already clean 135. You will be a 2-division world champion in the UFC.
Man, that's legacy right there.
You know?
That's legacy.
And that's what you offer.
Right now, she's going to be in the history, if she continues going down this path, she's going to be the greatest women's fighter ever.
I mean, she already almost is,
But if she gets 2 different weight divisions belts, it cements it. Hundreds of years from now, people will not be, you can have the Muhammad Ali of women. If she gets 2 different weight belts and 2 different weight classes, it signifies just how dominant she was, and it makes her an automatic number 1.
And there are matches out there. Cyborg's beating up Merlos Conan, but Merlos Conan has got a long resume of almost 30 fights, most of them wins. You could almost see Rousey fighting 3 or 4 times at 145, and then she could leave. I think they should really rush to make this fight happen one way or another by the end of the year. They should put it on that Conor McGregor card and sit back and count the pay-per-view buys. That's what the UFC should be doing with Ronda Rousey. Instead, what we're going to probably get is Amanda Nunes versus Ronda Rousey. For the 35 seconds that lasts.
Yeah, I know. Well, I know Nunes is over at the American Top Team right now, and Dan Lambert has got he's got an eye for talent. He can really pick it, and if he sees a little gem in somebody, he certainly can polish it and make it even brighter. So I'm pretty excited to see where Manny
any one of
Nunes
the
is
major
going to go.
teams can help any one of the major, any one of the up and coming fighters. In Correa, Nunes still looks like she could find another level as well. It's just the thing is preparing for the Rousey the Rousey effect, because at this point you're going to be in the eye of a media storm as well, and this, that, and the other stuff. And American Top Teams, hasn't put out all winners in terms of they just had Jessica Aguilar debut at featherweight, strawweight rather, and she was considered one of the top fighters in the world, and she came in, she lost her opening fight. So it's not a formula for success just that she's been with a big team. Nunes needs more than just being Nunes, and more than maybe just one more fight before she's ready.
No, she needs about 4 or 5 fights. I see that fight happening after Rousey makes the movie. So she's probably going to take a year off to make a movie, and
I think what will happen is I think she'll get Tate next. I think Tate won her fight, and I think that we'll get.
No, she's going to fight Tate, but then she's going to go make a movie.
Okay, and if the Tate fight doesn't happen and they actually can do this Cyborg fight, then we'll see how Rousey's schedule is. And there's always a chance. Now, this is interesting. Some of the books have lines up on Rousey and Cyborg, and Rousey's coming in a minus 380 favorite. So that is if the fight's at 135. They're not doing a 145-pound fight, but if the fight's at a catch weight of 140, Rousey's only favored by minus 300. So At 135, they feel that the weight cut will be too much for Cyborg, and like I said, there are lines already up on that. The UFC has not formalized the Tate fight yet, so we're not exactly sure what's happening there. We'll see how all this plays out in the next couple of podcasts.
Yeah, I'll tell you something about Chris Cyborg. She fought like a world champion kickboxer, and in stand up, and she got her butt beat. But she walked through all of those punches and was standing at the end of that fight. And she's no joke, but where I think her issues are is her jiu-jitsu just doesn't seem as tight as Rousey's. And if it goes to the ground, I see Rousey submitting her. But she can take a punch.
I think Rousey's efficiencies, and by efficiencies I mean you get people to the ground and you're already in position for a submission and stuff. You don't see that among the men that much. You see a lot more of position, control the position and then work the submission. That's usually the advice that they give you in MMA because it limits some of the risks of taking shots and stuff. But Rousey just gets you to the ground and she can go anywhere. And that's an interesting thing just because, I always think in the lower weight classes, the men have more technique than, I think Demetrius Johnson does more in the ring than Frank Mir does, for example.
Well, I tell you,
let me finish my thought real fast. But I think women physically are even more flexible than men. And Rousey, as an athlete and stuff, Rousey's just flexibility and ability to move and use her whole body and stuff has gotten her to the point where I don't know that many women are going to be able to resist her on the ground.
I agree. And her fluidity, like she speaks the fight game to where even Miesha Tate, there's lulls in her action to where she's kind of regrouping or she finds herself in a position. She finds herself in a position that she might not be comfortable with. And, you can kind of see like, okay, well now she's hitting a lull and now she's going to go back up high again to where Rousey is always like peaking. Like you never see her when she's not peaking. And, maybe it's because she hasn't had a lot of time in there yet, but, she hasn't had to, other than a Tate fight, which she carried.
Yep. All right, let's wrap it up here because we've actually gone about an hour. We touched upon the UFC a lot. We touched upon judging and on some of their draws and stuff. So we've gotten into some subjects. We got into the WSOF and Ruzimar Polares and the situation there with the holding of the submissions. We haven't talked about Bellator this time around, but we'll get to Bellator in our next one as they have a show coming up. And basically, this is Miguel Adorati with the State of MMA. I got Mike Davis, my sidekick, with me. We're going to sign out because the Talk and Shoot podcast has been here. Miguel and Mike, Talk and Shoot.